Welcome to what could have been called our Halloween WebinART, which is entitled Hide and Seek, the Art of Pat Keck. Brother Thomas wrote, "Artists are the discoverers and the custodians of the unlooked for. They see beyond, and yet they stay the course." We've admired Pat's art for nearly 2 decades, having seen her exhibition at the De Cordova Museum in 2003, entitled Puppets, Ghosts, and Zombies, with an extraordinarily fine essay by the curator, Nick Capasso. We were definitely attracted to her inventive and strange world and the sculptures that filled that space. Years passed, and we were occasionally reminded of her work by exhibitions at the Genovese Sullivan Gallery. About 4 years ago, we approached Pat and asked if she would like to have her work exhibited at our gallery. The timing was excellent, as we had just moved into our new space at 240 Newbury Street that had 13-foot ceilings and many, many electrical outlets. During the past few years, Pat has continued to very actively create new works, each clearly unique and each a fresh aspect of her universe and her imagination. Yet there is never and never was a shortcut at the execution of each masterwork. As we were preparing for her first full exhibition at the gallery, I wrote, how best to think about the astonishing art created meticulously by Pat Keck, how to describe why we are attracted to her art. Authenticity is the word that comes to my mind. There is no attempt to surprise or to shock or to preach. Each work, simply or not so simply, appears in Pat's imagination and calls to be born. She carefully amasses and crafts each element, from tiny screws to hand-sewn costumes, to a collection of watches, to strange hairdos. All are a piece of the intricate creating of each unique sculpture. There is no compromise as her vision is exactingly made. Then we are astonished when the work appears. There's a magical aspect to the completed work that belies the technical aspects of making it. We can only applaud quietly when confronted with the absolute discovery of each new work. Pat, it's amazing. We wait with excitement for each new surprise that lingers just around the bend or around the saw cut. Thank you to the wizard of our imagination, to Pat Keck. So once again, welcome to each of you who have decided to join us today. The format will be multi-layered. We're going to engage in a conversation around some of the works and benefit from a few really excellent videos. We hope that many of you who have contributed to the contest, which Rose will describe in a minute, called the Keck Contest, have enjoyed participating with us. Rose, can you share what the contest is?
Yes, so the prompt was, when Pat was nearing completion of Messengers, she set about collecting messages for it. She spent weeks in the library mining books for jokes and riddles, how-to manuals, guidebooks, cookbooks, as well as plays, poetry, and philosophy. She jotted down good lines from movies and stole song lyrics. Nothing was off the table for her hunt for messages. Of the 1,000 messages she collected almost 20 years ago for Messengers, used up only about a third of its capacity. This summer, she decided she would like to update it and renew her search, and she was hoping that people might be able to help her fill it up. What makes a good message? That's hard to say, except she knows one when she sees one. And so we asked people to submit as many as they could, and we will announce the contest winner at the end of this, so stay tuned.
So that's the one who has submitted the most number of messages. All right, so we're good. So now Pat and I and our co-conspirator, her brother Bob, will exchange some ideas and questions, and happily, Sooyun Kim, flutist, will add her superb music and perspective as we go along. For specific tales that inspire many of the works in our exhibition, let me refer you please to the printed catalog or to the e-catalog on the website, so we don't need to repeat those as we go along. Pat, let's start by asking you, if you don't mind, to describe just a bit of your own personal journey through your art that continues to engage us and to inspire you.
Sure. I always was attracted to, things that really weren't art. So when I went to art school, I felt like I should make things that looked more like art. And that just didn't work out for me very well. When I went to art school, it was sort of the height of minimalism and conceptual art. And I remember being, you'd have trips to New York, and you could get in an elevator and the doors would open and you could pretty much stand in the elevator and go, okay, I've seen this, and push another button. So I was always like looking for ways to make art more compelling and to draw the viewer in more. And so early things, I just sort of started with the basic shiny objects and bright colors and different materials. And as it evolved, I started trying to think of ways to involve the viewer much more directly to get them to actually physically connect with pieces. And then as I got a little further along, originally they were sort of jointed so that they looked like they did something, but they didn't, because I wasn't smart enough to figure out how to do anything else. And then as I went along, I started getting interested in actually making them do something. And my dad was a mechanical engineer, and he was very helpful at sort of keeping things real and making sure they were going to continue to work. Because, when you go to art school, making things that actually work is really not emphasized that much. It's all about the idea and stuff. So he was much more practical. No, if people are going to play with these things, you've got to make them so they're going to last. And so he really, drilled that into me. And he was just, an invaluable asset in terms of getting things, doing what I imagined. And at a certain point, he was older, so he wasn't, as up on computers and tech things. So at a certain point, he started getting a little balky about some of the things I wanted to do. And that's kind of when Rob came in, because he'd look at some awkward thing we had done mechanically, and he'd say, "You realize I can make you a little microcircuit about this big that's programmable to 1 million commands a second?" And, so I said, "You're my guy."
That's it. How does your father respond to being displaced?
He never really was, because these things still have a lot of mechanical parts to them. And the difference between engineering and art is that there is really only one right way to do things mechanically. There's various ways of doing it, but there's really only one best way. And he was very good at saying, no, we've got to find the best way of doing this. And he also was really good at teaching me how to troubleshoot things, because I would something was going wrong and I would leap to some conclusion and fix the wrong thing and mess something else up. And he said, you have to isolate the problem. So, he gave me a lot more confidence that I could, build things. And then, the electronics, as Rob can probably tell you, is far more reliable because it doesn't have little nuts that can fall off or things that it doesn't involve friction.
Right, but one of the things you're raising is for me at least, the issue of vision. In other words, you were correct in a certain sense to say that with mechanical things, there's only one right way when it really works. But with art, that's not true. But on the other hand, you have a clarity of your own vision as to what you want it to look like, what you want it to feel like, what you want it to do. So there is a Pat Keck right way.
Yeah, I'm still working on that, though. I mean, that's the thing, is you never get it as perfect as it is in your head. So then you have to do another one, and that one's going to be the good one. So they take so long to build that by the time you're done, you're thoroughly sick of looking at it, and then it hasn't really measured up to this vision that you got in the beginning. But by that time, you've got a new idea, and you think that's going to be the cool piece.
So you put us in a compromising situation where we're selling the seconds.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah,
You're selling all the practice pieces.
Keep practicing.
Yeah.
Rob, do you want to talk just a bit about how you got into this business, so to speak?
Well, it was actually pretty simple. She came up with this concept for a man that she wanted to look like was on fire. So she said, can you make a light bulb flicker? And, you know, there's lots of ways actually of making a light bulb flicker, but I was used to using these little microcontrollers, so it was very easy actually to use one of those to make a light bulb flicker. And that was the first piece we did together. So it was actually very, very simple, but it worked. And then she started coming back for more.
Right. And especially during COVID, to get back and forth to Rochester with all of her problems. And to the major problem being the ghost elevator, which is certainly a little more complicated than getting a light bulb to flicker. I would say for sure.
Yes, well, fortunately, Ghost Elevator was completed before COVID. That would have actually made things a lot more difficult. But
okay.
It did make quite a few trips back and forth. Sometimes just like one shaft or some. I think I actually mailed you the doors.
That's right.
To get those worked out, and so at some point he had 2 shafts and I had 1 shaft, and then we switched. And
there used to be an old phrase that kids used, which was to get shafted, but I'll leave that alone. But I don't want to mess things up by getting them out of order. But is it okay, Rose, if we look at the Ghost Elevators video now instead of when we had originally programmed it?
Yeah.
It seems it's pretty relevant, and it's an amazing piece. And I think the video, although it's just about 4 or 5 minutes, may seem a little long. I think it's a wonderful invitation to one of the more extraordinary works of art I've ever seen.
Yep. One moment. There we go.
Okay.
And the video.
Can we talk over this too while we're doing it? Oh, great. Okay. So Pat, do you want to not quite narrate, but at least share what was not, it's wrong to say what was going on in your head because I don't want to know that. But rather where you were going with this and why ghosts and this particular iteration of ghosts.
Sure. I have made ghosts before. They're sort of an exception because a lot of my things are like puppets or scarecrows or dummies or things that are sort of a little bit more, you know, physical. But I don't know, like the idea of making a wooden ghost I thought was funny. And right. When the show Puppets, Ghosts, and Zombies, a very small version of it went to the Kilkenny Arts Festival, not a ghost, but then I noticed that they were calling the show Puppets, Ghosts, and Zombies. So to get the work there, it had to, you know, go in a container ship. So all the work had been shipped, but I thought if I could make a little ghost that I could pack in my suitcase, then I could bring it and then they'd have a ghost in the show. And I actually got the idea for this piece at that time because I just thought levitating a ghost was even funnier than a wooden ghost. And I obviously, this was not going to fit in my suitcase. And I also recognized it was a very complex idea. But it just, what I ended up making is a little ghost that was on a seesaw and he's being outweighed by a feather. But I still wanted to build a ghost elevator. And I just, you know, you'll see later on that one of the other pieces was a practice piece. That's the Tricky Man. I thought, you know, one of the ways I could do this to isolate each problem. And one of the problems, of course, was opening the doors. And then the other was making the ghost or the figure disappear. So I sort of worked those things out in the Tricky Man, but then I ended up not using any of those techniques to actually do it, because when you get down to the nitty gritty, it just wasn't going to work the way it had in that piece. A lot of these sort of extra figures were sort of added on when I realized, you know, what I had basically made was this sort of facade with doors in it, and there wasn't that much going on until people actually pushed the button. So that's when the guys on top, I had always conceived that they had to be there, you know, looking like they were running the show. But the extra figures were sort of an afterthought, and also sort of a reward to me for doing all this other stuff, which isn't really in my wheelhouse, but I love carving the figures. So, you know, of the probably year and a half that it took me to build this, maybe 3 months were spent doing the figures, which was what I would have considered a fun part.
But the other thing is, and it's now installed in the gallery, and I'd ask Ian to set it up in such a way that people can go behind it. Because as Pat mentioned just before, here you go, this is a wonderful view of, this is the back of it. So this is as the elevators are going up and down in a somewhat non-synchronized manner, I assume. And Bob, you can talk to that, because you think it's going to open in column 1 on the 3rd floor, and it doesn't, but it opens in column 3 on the 2nd floor. And then it seems to go back and forth. And, you know, if you have a lot of time, you could spend 2 or 3 hours trying to figure out what the system is. Maybe you can help us. There's one that's empty that just opened.
It's nominally completely random.
Really?
Yes.
So is life. In many, many ways. So in a wonderful way, it becomes a metaphor. And these parts, and I think the video is so marvelous in this way, is to allow people to really sense these operators, if you will, in an extraordinary way, and give Pat, I think you were very right to have the backs showing as well, but also to have the figures, because you need somebody who's somehow present, not someone, but something that enjoys or is participating in the making of this work. It's really, really extraordinary piece.
Well, thank you. I mean, Rob mentioned the randomness, and that is one of my favorite things about computer control. I love the old automata, but they pretty much just could do one thing over and over and over again. And the fact that you can make it arbitrary and people can't predict what's going to happen is great. And I mean, I can build something and he can, we can get it all working. I say, oh, can we make that go a little faster? Or can we make this delay a little longer? And oh yeah, sure, we can do that. It's wonderful.
This is clear that we got somebody to push the buttons and then run away.
Yeah. Yeah, you do. It doesn't go up and down. You get to push the button yourself, and
which is
you can play tic-tac-toe with it.
It's one of my favorite things. The little kids, when they even get on the elevator at the old building or now where the gallery is to who of the 3 kids that are there gets to push the elevator button. And it's much that way. But also these inquisitive figures, and the suit that he's wearing, or the coat that he's wearing with all the buttons, is really wonderfully fabricated, is the word that comes to mind. But the care with which each element of the figures are done, the costumes are done, the clothing, it brings it all to a level of reality in something that has no reality except in your head. And I love that. So that that's when I mentioned at the very outset the notion of authenticity. That, and I use specifically the words that you were not there it wasn't a programmatic, you weren't preaching. We're inviting people into your space in a very engaging way. And I thought that aspect of the work just gets richer and more interesting piece by piece, because you confront what you want, and we'll talk a bit later probably about commissions, where you establish a relationship with the person who is commissioning a piece, and then allow your imagination to reposition what they think they're going to get by trusting you and allowing it to come out in quite an extraordinary way. Can we move on then to a couple of the other videos? Is that okay, Rose? To go back to the Tricky Man, because she mentioned that. Is that fine? I don't know if I lost Rose or not, but let's see if we can get to Tricky Man.
She's working on it.
I'm here.
Okay.
Would you, and not the studio tour yet? Tricky Man?
Let's do Tricky Man, and then we'll do the studio tour. That's okay.
Right. 1 second.
Because this is was one of my favorites before the ghost elevator showed up. Well, also because we have had many events in the gallery before COVID, and at all ages, this piece was one that certainly did what you mentioned initially, which is to engage people.
And then I also have a video where you can see
The man up top,
yeah.
his head goes down.
Yeah. I love the sound of the knocking.
Right. And so for no matter what the age is, people then begin looking into the, oh, can you open that again, please?
Mm-hmm.
Where did he go? And so that engagement, and I assume from your point of view, that's an incredibly important part of the process. So now he's gone.
Yeah.
And it isn't, this is not a film trick. This is a tricky man.
Yeah.
But Pat, do you want to talk a bit about each detail, the hairdo, the face, the hands, the shoes?
Sure. I mean, the funny thing about this piece is it really was a practice for the ghost elevator because it had two of the elements that I would have to, you know, to conquer to do the ghost elevator. So I was very much concentrating on getting the doors to work, getting the guy to disappear. And then all of a sudden, like when I did all that, I realized, you know, you've just got a box with a door in it. And I thought, well, we can't have that. So I thought, well, maybe I should just put a guy on top of the box. But you know, he needed a reason to be on top of the box. So then I thought, well, he could be the magician who appears to be making the guy either disappear or reappear. So there's two buttons. I do know people love to push buttons. So that's one of the things I started adding early on. Sometimes I put buttons in that didn't do anything just because people like pushing buttons. And I thought, well, I get them to come push this button. But yeah, so he's kind of wearing them, you know, little tailcoat like a magician. When you push one button, he knocks. Now I'm trying to remember if he knocks differently each time. He might. Can't remember. If you push one button, he appears, and then if you push the other button, he disappears.
We can see. Okay, there he is. All right, now knock again. Maybe.
This one has to push the button. There we go.
Oh, we have to push the other button first.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think it was the same number.
I think it is the same number. And now he's gone.
Yeah.
Wow. So that part of it, I can just tell you at any age there are, when families come and they have little kids, they'll pick them up and hold them there. And the kid is looking like, oh, and the sense of wonderment. I remember when we were talking the other day, Sooyun, you mentioned something about the sense of it being off-putting or grotesque from your point of view. But I must tell you that young people, I'm talking, you know, 3, 4, 5, 8 years old, are all engaged by and mystified by the magic of the tricky man. And we'll see later when we get to the aching head, the same thing. It's wonderment. It's older people who get a little bit more nervous, especially with the aching head. But I think now is the perfect time, if we can, to go on the tour of the studio. And let me just briefly introduce it, because it's an extraordinary pleasure to also welcome Sooyun Kim, who will be playing the 4th song of Jolivet's 5 Incantations in conjunction with a tour of, I think, Pat's studio. And the video was done by Curtis Brown, and he really did an amazing job of capturing so many things. Sooyun, for those of you who do know her, and those of you who don't, has been our beloved daughter since we met in the year 2007, as we celebrated the life, the work, and the wisdom of Brother Thomas. So let me share his words, which feel appropriate for Pat and for her art. Art is only a means when there's something interior to share. And when there is not, it is not art, it's just another thing. And so we're about to look at the art making place of Pat and then the playing of Sooyun. And Pat, you're more than welcome to guide the tour.
Oh, okay. Well, this is actually our house. This was my parents' house. This is the house I grew up in. And this is a very old piece. This is a piece that I did in art school when I was just sort of, I knew I wanted to use wood and I wanted to, you know, attach pieces, but I wasn't that good at it. So it was much more primitive. The puppet on the left there is one of the first puppets that I made. I just loved the way they looked kind of just hanging there. And then the other piece, the apparition, not a piece I'm not sure was a complete success, but it actually spawned a lot of, it gave me ideas for other pieces that I think were much more successful. So I'm kind of fond of it for that reason. This is my racing sculpture. This I did for my dad. He said he wanted this maximize the entropy subject to the constraints over his office door. And after he died, we hung it over the hearth. These are some little figures I carved for a play that we're hoping to put on of the third policeman. So we made some little figures to play around with. These are a couple of the puppets that we used in Night and Day, the film I made with Peter Anthony. My racing, this sculpture won the world's first sculpture race. I'm trying to think when that was. It was like 1982 or something. This was actually another racing sculpture. After having one, that took the pressure off. So I made this one, which is a push me, pull you, and it actually will go either way. So you don't know whether you've won or lost. This is Seated Giantess, who sort of presides over the place. And he's got a little relative in the gallery. This is a spinning sleeping man as opposed to a spinning dizzy man.
So these were easy motors for Bob.
Yeah, I don't think Bob was involved in this one. That's
wasn't involved in these.
Yeah, these are straightforward, you know, plug in, turn on.
And they work.
This is
Okay.
a very, very early Scarecrow.
So is that close to the manticore that's now in the gallery?
No, that'd be even earlier than the Manticore.
Okay. And these are the messengers for which the
Yeah.
messages, yeah.
Yeah. The light was, it was late in the day when Curtis filmed this, and he loved the way the light was coming through the window. So it's the puppet theater.
Right. And that's
And again, this really doesn't do anything. It's just sort of like the idea of who's pulling the strings that I was interested in.
which I think people who are interested in existentialism are as well. That's fabulous. Great lighting on that video.
I know that there's a print that looks very similar to this. Which came first?
This came first. So yeah, so I did this, and then usually after I do a piece, I like to make a print. Not for every piece, but we should be quiet now.
That's wonderful. I didn't know about the commercial announcement at the end. But Curtis, thank you so much. Sooyun, thank you so much. And if we can get to you, I'd love for you to talk a little about the choice of the piece of music and your response to Pat's work as well. And thank you so much for playing.
No, thanks for including me. You know, like Bernie mentioned, you know, I had been going to the gallery, and I mean, so my relationship with the gallery is now probably up to 10 plus years. I would like to think of it as like a continuation of training that I received from my teacher, Paula Robeson, who actually introduced me to Bernie and Sue Pucker. So that part of it is the musical training. I think my relationship with the gallery has kind of opened up my horizon as a musician to in a way that, you know, music and what I do as a musician is not just limited to sound, but I could also be thinking a lot about shapes, art, or space. I remember having this conversation with the great Sam Bach, and he told me, this was after I played at one of his openings, and he said, you know, music is so great, it's so abstract, and it's limitless in terms of space. And this is the first time I started thinking about a sound in spatial sense. And he said, you know, you could contain it in a small room, or it could be expanded into a large concert hall. And also, he said, like, you know, music has so much movement. It's a movement that you cannot see, and that's the limit. There is a limitless possibility in that. And so I started thinking a lot about space and movement. And when I first was introduced to your work, Pat, I was like, oh my God, this is art that is moving, you know, just like in music, because music is an art that's in time, meaning that it moves through time. And that was kind of the sense that I got from your work, is that it's kind of moving. There is more spatial sense, meaning that it's a multidimensional work. And also the moving part made it kind of, it created more sense of time for me. Yeah, and then just, I don't know, I just heard a lot of red, bright red and bright white and black in this particular piece by Joe Levé. You know, he was a son of a painter and a dancer. His mother was a dancer, his father was a painter, so he was a very visual person. And this piece is actually one of the pieces that he was really inspired by his father's works. And so I thought, it's kind of like, I imagine like just watching your studio tour, you're kind of like the magician that's kind of bringing the life to these little puppets that you're creating, and in such a way that they start to move too, because you figured out how all the mechanical part is working too. So that was the reason behind choosing this piece.
Well, I thank you so much for doing it. And I think when we spoke the other day, you also mentioned the work itself in terms of your response to it, that some of it wasn't scary to you, but it felt
Oh yeah,
otherworldly.
Yeah, it was. So it's kind of like, it was my initial reaction to your work was that it was definitely very grotesque, I would say, but it wasn't grotesque in a very dark sense. There was something really fantastical about it, which I loved so much. One of the books that my teacher, Paul Robeson, had me read is Magic Mountain by Thomas Mann.
Oh.
You know, the story is so
Yeah.
grotesque and so dark, but he somehow was able to illustrate it in a very fantastical way. It's almost like a fantasy world that they're living in this camp. And that was the image that I got from your works.
Oh, cool.
That's really wonderful. Yeah, that brings back a rather personal memory. Sue, I don't think she knew what she got into when we got married, but that's 61 years ago. But on our honeymoon, we were going across on the Homeric from Quebec City to Le Havre. And my reading at that time was The Magic Mountain. So you can tell how romantic I was. I had no clue what, poor Sue got stuck with me at that point. But when you mention that, that's a really strange memory and connection that goes back over 60 years ago.
Wow.
So hopefully we can continue our friendship, Sooyun, for another 60 years.
Yes, please.
We'll do our best.
Yeah.
I just wanted to go back, if we could now, Rose, to the aching head, because I think that's one of the strongest of the pieces. And so this is still photographs of it. Pat, do you want to talk about the beginnings of this piece and then how it
Sure.
has come to being?
This piece was actually inspired by that little fork that's sticking into his head. I found it, you know, just after my mom died, I was sort of clearing out stuff, and we sort of ended up with all the stuff that when anybody died, we'd get the dregs of the stuff, and nobody threw anything out. So we had all this stuff, and I wanted to make room for my own work in the house. So I was purging, but I really liked the fork. It's hard to see in the picture, but it has kind of a little demonic figure on the top. And I thought it would be great, like for a sentry to be clutching this, but it was too short, you know. So it was gonna, you know, I wanted the sentry to be big, and so I thought, well, okay, well, he's just gonna have to be small, and I couldn't get it to work. And then I thought, well, what if he was actually on the fork himself? And then of course he needed something to get the fork up, and I thought, oh, you know, I could have it sticking in a head. Why not? And
Right. Everyone would ask the same question, I'm sure. So that's fine. Yeah, right.
And at some point, I just thought, you know, I'm working on the. I think I knew I wanted to have the eyes open, and once I got the head involved, I thought it would be nice to involve the eyes. And a lot of dummies and automata have what they call blinkers, which are moving eyelids, which move independently from the eyes. And I have never been able to cope with the scale of that on my usual scale. But I thought, this is big. You know, I could work out how to make the eyelids move independently. And then, of course, I had to ask my brother. We had actually just started using motion detectors. So the way this one works is it just sits there in his, you know, private hell until somebody makes a noise, and he will either wake up suddenly or he'll just sort of partially wake up, and sometimes he will roll his eyes and go back to sleep, and other times, again, this is the wonderful thing about computer control, is you have all these options. So I have to say that this piece was done in 2016, and if anybody remembers what happened in November of 2016, this piece really reflects the way I was feeling. So a lot of that is in there. But that's kind of the evolution of it. It's sort of.
But I remember you also saying that originally the figure had a neck.
Yeah, I had, you know, when you do a drawing of something, of course, you're just looking right at it, and I drew the head, and you can make it look straight at you. But when you actually physically build it, you realize, well, no, that's actually not the way people are going to be seeing it. So when he had the neck, he was kind of just staring straight out into space. And I was working on the head independently. And when you put the head on the floor, it was just sort of sitting like that. And he was looking up at you. And I thought, yeah, that's much better. So yeah, I mean, I have a vision in my head, but I'm also open to suggestions, you know, that the pieces make themselves, really. They sort of, like, you hear about authors talking about how their characters, you know, they think they're going to do one thing, and that they say, no, that's not what they would do. So the characters kind of take over, and that does actually happen.
Well, that's for sure in this piece, but this has been seen, was before COVID, when people would come down the hall and then they would clap, or I would clap when they're standing in front of it, and then they would go running out of the gallery. Not really, but it was interesting to see the range of responses to it, because it was kind of both quiet and somnambulant, and then suddenly the sense of awakening. And what you said, that placing it in 216 makes it all the more relevant that he must have spent the last 4 years with his eyes in shock. So I think there's an opportunity now for him to go back to the left-hand side and maybe relax just a bit. But it's quite a wonderful piece, and the scale of it is very important, because the scale of the head is enormous. So that it's oversized for a person, even a big football player. So it's wonderful to have it in the space for me, because it is, again, interactive without people having to turn something or move it, but just simply go by. And then Liz, who works in the gallery, sometimes has a relatively high volume voice. and on her own, she can get him to wake up. So, it's quite wonderful. I just wanted to, Rose, if we can go to Pat's studio, over her shoulder is this figure, which I think is part of a commission.
Yes.
And maybe just to look at that for a minute. And Pat, just to talk a little about that before we go on to the messengers, because I love or to the man keeping an eye on things. But what I love is the fact that you've done over the years a number of commissions, and it obviously takes two to tango with Bob's help. But your ability to hear the interest of the person and at the same time then to remain clear to your own vision is an enormous challenge as well as an opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so I don't know if I can make this a little. This guy was actually in the studio tour. He's a little further along now. Let me see if I can get him a little bit more. So this was commissioned by a doctor who was a fertility doctor, and he collected things that had related to eggs. So he had a lot of things either with egg shapes in them or that kind of form. And he, liked my work and wanted to commission something. And so he sort of showed me some of the things he had, and we talked a bit. And he talked a lot about the process that he goes through to create life, so to speak, or not to so to speak, to actually do it. And so I said, well, let me think about it. Because he was, the nice thing about it was he was very open to what I wanted to do. So he did want sort of something that related to what he did, but he was also very open to whatever direction I took that in. So I thought about it a lot, and I kind of was, a lot of times it's kind of like writing a play when he did say he wanted an animated piece, and he did say he wanted Rob involved. So, okay, I knew that had to happen. And so then the question became, what's the little story that goes with the piece? And I had this idea about a guy stirring something. It kind of relates to my dad's maximized entropy subject to the constraints. He was always talking about, like, you can't ever decrease the entropy. When you mix the paint together, no matter how hard you stir, the black and the white are never going to separate out again. So I like that idea, but I sort of needed more of a reason for him to be stirring something. And I'm not sure whether it showed on the studio tour, but you took a picture when you visited. There was a little guy actually sitting in a bowl. It was one of the little tiny figures I made, and I just sort of chucked him in a bowl. And I think I was just sort of sitting at my drawing table, and I saw that little figure in the bowl, and I thought, he could be in a bowl himself. And then, of course, yeah, I'm not sure it's in it would have been in the paint shop. So this is how things get more complicated. So you go from just one figure stirring something to then he's in a bowl. And then I thought, well, wouldn't it be cool if the bowl he was in then started to spin? And then wouldn't it be even cooler if the thing he was sitting on then started to spin? And then that's when I have to email Rob and say, is this even a possibility? Oh, there he goes. Yeah, now so my brother I sent him drawings. He sent me this little motor with the mount so I could, make sure the arm was going to work. I have progressed to the point where I know in a mechanical piece, you don't build the piece and then try to make the arm work. So the arm was very important to get that working first. And now I'm just sort of working out all the other bits. The key was, trying to make him so he actually fit in the bowl with his bowl.
But there's this wonderful coming together of two people, one who's open and the other who is creative. And then there becomes an opportunity for your imagination to also participate very actively and then drive Bob crazy. But to create challenges that will enhance the end result. And I love that part of what a commission can be,
right.
where people, and commissions are very tricky things. You know this probably better than I, but after many years, there are very few artists that we work with in the gallery for whom I would put forward to do a commission. And I think there needs to be the right match in that situation. And I think in this case, it is a wonderful match. But the idea of allowing your imagination then to take itself to another place, and then what you said before, which is once you've done this, there'll be other ones born as a result of this, which is, I think, what process is very much about. Let's look at
and I'm very grateful to him too, because I love the idea. And when I got it, I thought, I'm getting a little far off the mark here, but he was just like, when I showed it to him, he's like, oh yeah, this is, I love it. So that was really nice. What I usually do is before I take a commission, I say, I will do what I think you will like, but the most important thing is I have to like it. So if I make something and then you don't like it and I don't like it, then everybody's unhappy. So I'll just say, well, okay, I'll build something I think you'll like, and you have the right to refuse it.
Yeah, no, I think that's
worked out really well.
I think that is the best way, true. And for the most part, that's how we've approached any commission in the gallery. That it does have to resonate with the person who's going to be living with it, but it also has to reflect the integrity of the art itself. So that it's critical that it goes both ways. So we had a piece which is not in our talk today called Man in Restraints, I think. There was a fellow who was in the electric chair, or what looked like
Man with Some Restraints, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So that was one of the first pieces, I think, new pieces you finished when we took it in the gallery. And it was a man in restraints. I would certainly, and there's a woodcut that sort of parallels that, and you can see the image in the catalog if you want. But it looked to me like a piece that we would be having for the rest of our days. It was motion activated. It was a fellow who looked like he was in an electric chair. And then when you moved, his eyes followed you around the room. And it was a little bit weird. And I must say that of all the pieces of yours that we first had, that was the first one to sell. So it was a perfect example of how little I know about what I'm doing, but it was a wonderful opportunity. And it brings me to The Man with an Eye on Things, which is, I think, another absolutely wonderful piece, because rocking chairs have meanings for all different people of all different times. This there's a video of, so people will get a really good sense. That little center button is, in fact, the, I guess, motion detector that enables it to move. Right. So there you go. And so what were you thinking, Pat?
Well, this is another idea that's been in my head for a very long time. And so it was inspired by a film that I think it was not Buster Keaton's last film, but it certainly was one of the last. And Samuel Beckett wrote the script. And it ends with him in this rocking chair and just rocking. And he has an eye patch. So he's a one-eyed man and he's rocking in the chair, and then he just goes to sleep. But then if anything happens, he wakes up. So I wasn't even sure, when I first got the idea, whether it would be life-size or whatever. But when I finished the Ghost Elevator, and I knew to have this show coming up, and I said, okay, well, whatever it is, I've got to be able to finish it in time. And so that sort of determined that the scale, and COVID had started. So I knew that if I made it small, if I had to mail it to Rob rather than bring it, I could mail it to him. And it was also possible for me to build the whole piece. And then, as long as he kind of knew what the parameters were, I could bring it to him and then he could install the mechanism. As I worked on him, he was sort of my little COVID companion, and his eye movement is hooked into the head motion. So the way that I did it is just like, I wanted there to be an eye. People always want to, they always look under things. So I thought, well, if I give him an eye patch, somebody is going to peek under there, and there's got to be an eye under there. So that's, I just put that there. And then I thought, well, I'll paint it just so it looks like a blind eye. And just as I, had him in my studio and he was, I was working on the mechanism and flipping his head up and down, that eye was always looking at me, and it just became kind of endearing to me. So he never got an eye patch.
That's okay. I think it makes it apparent. You're right. We've had people sort of either peek under things or decide. Yeah. So I think that having it available to everybody, and I assume that the eye patch is optional. So if somebody buys it, you can make an eye patch.
if they don't like that eye looking at them.
I love it. Rob, was this a difficult piece, or this seemed to be sort of straightforward for you?
this was relatively straightforward. The mechanism's quite simple, and the sensors are something that you can get on Amazon for $2. So it really was a pretty easy piece for me.
That's interesting. So you shouldn't reveal your price or your source, because whatever we're charging for it would make it seem like it's outrageous.
Oh, well, my engineering fee, if I charge Pat by the hour, this sculpture would be 10 times the price. But
anyway, it's quite marvelous. It was around the corner. Now it's featured in the present exhibition when people come in. So they'll be certainly alerted to it as they walk by. The man in the chair will certainly recognize them. And the last piece we're going to look at plays into the contest, which is the messengers, which is, oh, I didn't know we were going to look at this, but I'm happy to look at it. There's a dizzy man, and you have the relative in your studio.
Yeah. And you can see sort of that I've gotten an interest in rotating patterns and stuff, which has led into this piece too. So everything relates to everything else.
Right. Years ago, this is one of my favorite pieces. This is one of the pre-Bob pieces. This is a cranker, essentially. You should talk about it, Pat, because it's a piece that you brought back and then I think added to, didn't you?
Yeah, it actually, it sold somewhere, and then I think my husband or somebody alerted me to the fact that it was up for auction. So he got it back for, I think the most expensive part of it was shipping it back. And it never had a base before, and when you turned the crank, it tended to walk around. And so I thought, well, it'd be better if everything was kind of unified. So the base is the table that it's sitting on is new, but other than that, it's pretty much the original thing. I had done a bunch of drummers, had this idea about making an all drum orchestra. And so I had done a number of different size drummers. And then I did a couple where I thought, including this one, where I thought it'd be fun if I sort of made them work together and have a little bit more of a rhythm to them. So as you turn the crank, the two drummers kind of are syncopated, and then every so often the guy with cymbals crashes the cymbals together. And just to give you an idea of scale, they are drumming on coffee cans with finishing nail drumsticks, and the lids of the coffee cans are the cymbals.
Well, something fun about showing people around the gallery is you can hear when people discover your pieces. And so with this one, you can see, okay, I see a crane.
You know right away when somebody's found it.
Instinctively, they want to open it and start playing with it. But then you also can hear people's reactions to things kind of startling them. So with Man with an Aching Head, when the eyes fly open, you oftentimes hear like a little yelp, and then kind of walk around because your work is so recognizable, kind of trying to figure out how to make it move or how to interact with it, which I think is really playful and really fun to be able to hear that discovery happen, both the work discovering the person and the people discovering the work.
Yeah.
That's absolutely perfect. For me, it actually serves very positively, because when the staff is sleeping, I can wake them up. But the last piece is the messengers. It's an extraordinary piece. It's 85 by 60 by 30. So it's immense. And it is an extraordinary piece, and became the focus of the contest for which there's a choice of one of the three woodcuts. And just briefly, Pat, before we talk about it, speak just a little about the woodcuts, which are really wonderful representations of your world. And in an intimate way, one, the wood, and then two, it's a very direct process.
Yeah. Again, I just enjoy doing something that I think, I can draw this and I can cut out the blocks and then I can print them, and in a finite amount of time I will have something, as opposed to my own work where I get an idea and then, in this case, 2.5 years later, I get to see it. So I like, the relative immediacy of it. And I also like, sort of bouncing off the pieces themselves. I not always, but a lot of, especially the major pieces, I do like to do a woodblock print. I like that it makes it, accessible to more people, because obviously people don't have the money or the room for a lot of these things, but they can, they can get a print. So that's a nice thing. In the case of the ghost prints, when you actually are playing with the ghost elevator, you don't get a huge amount of time to see the actual ghost. So I thought it would be nice if I just did if each ghost had their own, you know, little print, so people could say, okay, that's what that one looks like. And again, when I was printing other prints, I would notice that I frequently liked the prints I got when I was cleaning the block off better than the ones I was working so hard to print, because they were very crisp and precise. And so when I got the idea of making prints of the ghosts, I thought that's perfect. It's already like a ghostly kind of thing. So I don't, and they were one of the easiest to print because you didn't have to bear down very hard. And it's all done with black ink. It's very faint. So there's just a number of blocks with different things carved on them, and you just layered to get the different shades.
They're absolutely wonderful because they do give you, it's kind of a trio of them, and they do replicate in a very simplified fashion each of the ghosts in the ghost elevator. So whoever has submitted the most messages is going to be the winner and is going to be able to choose one of these 3 ghosts or ghostly gifts for their efforts. But Pat, just at the end, if we want to go back and just talk for a second about the messengers, because this is just an absolutely amazing tour de force of, in Yiddish, they say a mishagas. I don't know how to translate it. It's an eccentricity taken to an extreme in the most wonderful way, because there's a sense of us as human beings wanting to communicate, needing intervention sometimes to send those messages from one place to another. Your openness to other people submitting messages so that you can get it up to 3,000, which is the capacity of this, goes back, I guess, to not only the issue that I mentioned in the beginning, randomness, but also the authenticity, but the notion that randomness is part of life itself. And so that somehow, when we're all said and done, all these images remind us of the fact that there is, in fact, no pattern to what we think is life. And the messengers certainly bear that out 3,000 times.
One of the things I liked best when it was at the De Cordova is if I was into fixed things, which I was quite frequently, the guards would often tell me, you know, stories about people interacting with things. And what was interesting is how often people thought that the message they got was sort of meant for them. You know, that they somehow people would get a message and think, yeah, that's meant just for me. And it's completely random, but I love that that would happen more than once, actually.
That's great. A lot of tea bags used to be the same thing. You used to get a message when I thought that was such a wonderful marketing tool. If you like tea, even if you didn't, you're interested in what your message would be. Yeah. So Rose, if you want to announce the winner, and then I just want to thank everyone.
Yeah, so drum roll please, with 186 entries. Okay, this person worked hard. Peter Ahern, you are the winner, and you will be able to select one of these beautiful, amazing prints. So congratulations. Look at this little animation there.
I actually know Peter. He's a wonderful artist too. So well done, Peter.
Yeah, congratulations.
Either that or Peter didn't have a lot to do the last couple of weeks.
And thank you to all the other submissions. They were really fun to read, and I will forward them along to Pat to help fill them.
And I may very well put them all in.
So let me just end by thanking you, Pat, Bob, Rose, thank you so much. Sooyun, thank you. And just thanks everyone. These have become, for me, a very important part of what the gallery has always been about, but in a much more direct and intimate way than we ever could have done. So I'm grateful to everyone, Pat, especially to you, and for the absolute joy and delight that your work continues to bring to all of us.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. Rose, thank you.